Hey ladies and gents, Spazzy here, aka Syndromes, and welcome to this little video. Now before I begin, this video is more about me talking, and so all the footage you're currently seeing here is just for the sake of a background, so that explains its quality, or rather, the lack thereof. So feel free to just put this video back in the background and just listen, because I have a story to tell you. So, at some point in the past, I started using the term, quote, perpetual game, end quote. And until very recently, I was making a video project about it and how it works. As it happens, however, something in my life has changed very relatively recently that has made me kind of reconsidered making this video. And in order to provide context to what this video is all about, and also to give its now console project some sort of justice, the condensed version is very simple. The nature of the, quote, perpetual game, end quote, is usually a multiplayer experience to which you, as a gamer, dedicate your effort and attention to a level that is beyond just playing the game. So, for example, it might not be a game that you log in every single day in, but it is a game that you breathe. So, for example, you possess a in-depth knowledge about it and its meta, for example. Actively participate on its forums or subreddits or whatever. You can create content for it in the form of videos or tutorials or written guides. You, for example, could work on its Wikipedia page. You might even be a well-known and well-established person in its community, for better or for worse. In my life, I have had 3 such games. The first one was Savage in the early 2000s, then came Discovery Freelancer in the late 2000s, and my third and last one to this date has been PlanetSide 2 in the late 2010s. All of these 3 titles have held the position of my perpetual game of choice. A game which and the community of which I made the focus of my free time for literal years on end, and that is the context of this video. The purpose of that previous project was to highlight how fun it was, and to kind of explain the concept of the perpetual game, and also to encourage people who wanted to find their cozy little gaming community and family to try and find a game like that. And it is that exact purpose that I now have very serious second thoughts about. So what exactly happened? Okay, so at the time recording this video, in 1 month from now, I will be 31 years old. And I know this might sound just a little bit on the dramatic side, but as someone who has never really thought about it earlier in my life, to suddenly know and suddenly realize that statistically speaking, I have reached half of my allocated years on this world is, uncomfortably sobering. Now, honestly though, it is something that I started thinking about a year or so ago when I started noticing that certain new health-related issues and pains or whatever were not just something that would just go away anymore. If anything else, there is a list that I currently see as a sort of, it is what it is, of things that is wrong with me, that is just, I've learned to, just adapt to it. It's just a part of my everyday now. There's actually this one funny picture where a dude is visiting the doctor, and the doctor asks if there's anything in pain, and the dude responds, well, nothing outside the ordinary pain, and the doctor just looks at it and is like, there is not supposed to be the usual amount of pain. That's not a thing that it exists. And yeah, that's basically my current situation. Okay, and it is, again, very sobering to know that from here on out, it's only going to get worse, and as time goes on. But the reason, what about the time that already has went? And yes, this is where we actually start to get into the point of this video. The older I get, the less things about my past I remember distinctly. I'm a gamer. I live most of my social life on the internet. And so because of that, if I was told to draw a timeline of my life up to this point, and then I was told to explain what chapters are there, then chances are I would end up using games, and especially my perpetual games, as sort of dividing chapters to figure out what kind of sections of my life I'm kind of remembering about. It's like, oh, I remember this. This was back in the day when I was, playing X. And yeah, Now, that being said, I will be the first one to admit that I have been an amazingly fortunate person and a remarkably lucky one. In that, I mean that none of these chapters would be centered around some sort of family tragedy or stress or some sort of mishap or incident. For me, it literally is just my social life and my hobbies, in this case mostly video games, which define the way that I see my past and how I reference it and how I navigate through these memories. I was born in 1990, and so the latter part of those years were, game-wise, dedicated to, well, what we would currently refer to as classical consoles, such as the NES or the Genesis. Mind you, I didn't have the NES, I had the Famicom, but you get the idea. After that came stuff like Unreal Tournament, Counter-Strike, stuff like that, as we enter the 2000s. You have your Need for Speeds, you have your Crash days, you have Half-Life, stuff like that. And Savage was the first game that I mentioned to be my perpetual game, in that it was because for almost 2 years I played nothing but it, and actively participated in the forum and stuff like that. So similar, though, to a slightly lesser extent, there was also Unreal Tournament 2004, then came Battlefield 2 and Project Reality as we entered the late 2000s. And this is where Disco comes in, and this is the pivotal point. As I already said many times before, Discovery Freelancer Gaming community is the community that I have been in for the longest time, starting from 2007-ish and ending in the late 2000 and teens. The issue here is that even though those years have plenty of interesting titles, such as Mass Effect or Skyrim, whatever, Disco dominated my multiplayer and social scene for such a very long time. And so even though my participation there lasted for 10 years or even more, because let's face it, it's not like I just abruptly stopped counting myself as a part of that community, now that I look back at that period of time, it's just a big homogeneous chunk of time, which, even though is longer in raw amount of time span than it was from, say, 1998 to 2008. For some reason, looking back at it, it is just categorized in my mind as the time of Disco, and that's it. Now, again, I am very suddenly very conscious about how much time of my life has passed. And to realize that 10 years, a third of my life, at the time, making this video, is remembered so vaguely, that is not good. That's not good at all. Yes, I know that you tend to remember more things from your early childhood and your teens in detail simply because you put things into perspective of a relatively shorter time span, and thus it sticks out a little bit more. But honestly, given that Disco occupied so much of my free time during those years, it really is just white noise. Now, make no mistake, I loved every bit of that time. That is no doubt when I stayed there for literally years upon years. But what the hell? Alright, let's move on to PlanetSide 2. I first mentioned that it basically replaced Discovery Freelancer as my perpetual game at around 2018 or thereabouts. Oh wait, that was 4 years ago! So, what I can remember about those 4 years in detail game-wise, if I wanted to, reference point. I mean, Apex Legends was a thing, I guess. I played it pretty much non-stop for a few months, but of course I eventually went back to PlanetSide because that is where I had the most invested personal effort and free time in terms of the people who I knew, the people that I played with, the faction that I was in, the outfit that I was in, so far and so forth. The perpetual game, again, has nothing to do how often you log into the game itself, and it's important. It's how important of a role it plays in your daily routine and free time. And okay, maybe I'm being a little bit too over the top with this. Maybe I just have a shit memory. Maybe my last 10 years, in terms of my real life, have not been really that eventful, for better or for worse, than my teens were. Which makes sense, because work is still a routine. But then again, so is school. So I cannot really use that as an excuse. All that I know is that I really do not want to make the same mistake over again, Me getting into PlanetSide 2 in 2018 smacks me of the same sort of pattern that I had with Disco. And while I have loved the last 4 years of me just being a part of that community, I will wake up at some point when I'm 40, and I will no doubt sit here and write a very similar sort of script. I just know it, because I'll probably forget I made this video. So yeah, Perpetual game. Amazingly fun when you're in your 20s. Freaking terrifying when you're in your 30s. Or maybe that's just my age just catching up with me and realizing that I really haven't done much with my life and I should probably consider something. Anyway, I want to branch out. I want to play more different games. I want to stop hyper-focusing on games that I play. I want to fill like terabytes worth of terabytes of games on my hard drive and just play them if I want to keep gaming as one of my, cornerstones of my life, which, I mean, let's be completely honest, that is never going to change. I really doubt that. Obviously I live alone, so I don't have a family life to worry about, which could, completely distract me from gaming in general, so I obviously am one of the exceptions, although who the hell knows these days, people don't get married anyway. And yeah, that is my current situation. This video is not for you. This video is for me. This video is for me to look back in about 5 years and try to figure out, okay, so I uninstalled PlanetSide 2, I told people what was up, I had to take a break, and I do need a break, because, like, before I start doing the same mistakes. My question is, in 5 years from now, when I'm going to take a look at this video, will I realize that, was that the problem? Was the Perpetual game the problem? Was it a good idea to not advertise it as a thing that you should totally do? I do not know, but I will want to find out. This is a message in a bottle to my 40-year-old self, if I'm lucky enough to live that long. And yeah, that's pretty much it. That is what's currently happening with me. Now, to be fair, this has no impact on the channel, this has no impact on Avorion, and yeah, it's just a kind of self-reflection, self-observation sort of thing, maybe something that you might want to think about if you are younger than me, or, if you're as old as me, feel free to tell me I'm wrong. I mean, it wouldn't be the first time, obviously. And yeah, that is the current situation. I don't know what to say. Anyway, ladies and gents, thank you for having... thanks for having my... thanks for having me here. Thanks for, letting me borrow your ear for a moment. And yeah, future content coming right up? Question mark? Huh.